Good afternoon. We're just going to wait for a few more attendees and then we will start today's webinar. Perfect. Well, we've got a few people still joining, but I'll start by kind of going through the topic and what we'll be looking at today. So as we all kind of, can see, we're going to be focusing today on kind of the import one-stop shop registration and, utilizing how beauty and fashion brands can really grow from there. Just to kind of introduce myself for those of you that may not have seen me in the past on some of our webinars, my name is Liam. I am the Partnerships and Senior Business Development Manager here at Simply Beauty. So I've been working here for about 3 years now. Just going through, daily conversations with brands who are looking to grow their kind of businesses internationally, and also working with partners to help support their clients' growth also. And for those who are unfamiliar with us here at Simply BAT, we are an international tax agency firm who are able to kind of support businesses growing internationally and, looking to set up in new markets. We will be covering today kind of the sales into the EU, how utilizing the import one-stop shop can boost those sales also going into the EU, and why is it such a great fit for those who are doing beauty and apparel, brands, and why it's such an important kind of registration to help growth. Just before we kind of kick off fully, we are going to be going through some frequently asked questions towards the end of today's webinar. There is also a Q&A kind of area in the top of your kind of Teams channel. So please do feel free to just pop a question in there if you have any along today's kind of discussion, and then we'll be able to go through that towards the end of today's session. So if we kind of jump straight into looking at selling into the EU, the first thing that you need to kind of look at is how to know where to tax when selling to an EU kind of consumer. What is the precise nature of that taxable transaction? Obviously, for today's kind of topic, it will be mainly focused on goods, but obviously sometimes you may have, a subscription that goes along with something that may be classed as a service. So it's always looking at what is the nature of that transaction, and also the status of your client. Are they a business? Are they a general consumer? So it's looking at how those are treated as well, because they do have different kind of VAT treatments. And where are the goods delivered from and to? Obviously, as mentioned, for today's kind of purposes, we are going to be really focusing on those direct consumer sales from goods held outside the EU. But I would also touch on kind of different, areas to look at when also growing into the EU, if you're holding stock, what that differentiation may look like, and just kind of go through those discussion wise as well. And the other kind of key area is who needs to account for that VAT. Is it going to be your customer, yourselves, or if you are holding sales on a marketplace, such as, are you going to be using Amazon as a sales channel? Or if you have multiple different sales channels that you are utilizing for this new kind of venture moving forward. One of the kind of key questions and one of the main things that we tend to discuss on these discussions with clients, and definitely something that I hear quite a lot, is, am I required to collect VAT on these orders that I'm selling to an EU consumer or an EU business? And looking at knowing where to tax, do I need to tax in the EU? The answer is typically no, but as long as you're not acting as the importer of record. And the importer of record is quite a key terminology for when you are looking to sell into the EU, whether that be to a consumer, to a business, because whoever acts as that importer of record is typically the liable party then for collection and remittance of VAT. So if that is yourself, then you would need to then register for VAT or have an IOSS registration when you look to kind of sell to consumers within the EU. The main kind of Incoterms to look at, which I've kind of noted here as well, is if you are selling goods from a non-EU location and you're sending it under a DAP Incoterm, which stands for delivered at place, that pushes the importer of record status onto your end consumer. And so they will cover any kind of applicable VAT and duties when the goods land in the country that they are, established within. Typically, what that looks like is if you are, say, holding something and selling it to a client in Germany or a customer in Germany, and the goods land with them, you've sent it as a DAP Incoterm, then they would basically cover the 19% VAT plus any duties upon the goods landing. So unfortunately, the VAT is obviously unavoidable in kind of the sales scenario both ways, but you would need to kind of decide who acts as that importer of record when the goods land. And the IOSS is something that allows you to act as the importer of record, which I'll go through in a bit more detail very, very shortly. So this is the other kind of area. So what about if I do want to act as that importer of record? So if you are going to be obviously shipping or, sending goods to a consumer under a method of delivery duties paid, which is DDP, then you will trigger the need, as I've kind of highlighted previously, for a VAT registration in the country where the goods land, or the IOSS scheme for applicable orders. This is very similar to also if you are doing, just business to business sales. So if you are selling to a VAT registered business, for example, or non-VAT registered to be fair, but just a business within, say, Germany or a business within France, if they are acting as the importer of record, then you don't need any kind of VAT registrations. If they are not acting as the importer of record, then you may trigger a need to either obtain a VAT number or an IOSS or a simplified scheme moving forward. So looking at the import one-stop shop scheme, this is kind of the key area that we're going to be focusing on today. So the import one-stop shop, the key kind of facts to look at is it is an optional scheme, but it does enable you to avoid registering for VAT in all the countries where the goods will be landing or you'll be selling to consumers. So it really is kind of a simplified kind of, cover-all scheme, really. It's also to report VAT on sales of goods below 150 euros. So you do have a consignment value threshold. This is where I believe it does turn into quite a key registration for those beauty and apparel brands. You may have a typical average consignment value, below the threshold. I know, for example, quite a lot of independent kind of fashion brands may go above or below that, but they may have, 70% of their orders with a value below 150 euros. So you can then register for the IOSS scheme to really kind of look at the market in a bit more detail, break down where your best kind of sellers go to, because it enables you to kind of sell to every single member state within the EU. So you can really kind of get a bit more transparency and clarity around, where your goods may be more good to warehouse in future, or if you wanted to maybe utilize Zalando for fashion brands within Germany, you can then see whether Germany's quite a big area for you to kind of grow into before kind of taking that leap and getting that registration in Germany to set up and sell on those marketplaces. With IOSS as well, so non-EU traders are required to appoint an intermediary. That's where a company such as ourselves here at Simply VAT can kind of support with. So we are able to act as that intermediary for non-EU brands to help them get set up and then handle those ongoing returns. And as kind of previously mentioned as well, it does allow businesses, inclusive of marketplaces, to collect and report the VAT due on those imported goods to consumers in just one single return. So it is very much one return, one payment, and it just allows you to kind of have that free circulation and take real advantage of those markets. The inclusive of marketplaces as well is I know some people watching today, or you may have using a marketplace such as Amazon, for example, Amazon do enable you to sell from, say, the UK, I believe also maybe the US, into the EU by utilizing their import one-stop shop number. So if you're not quite ready to kind of leap over to your own website, or you're still looking at getting that set up, and you are already launched on Amazon, you take advantage of their IOSS number to really kind of see whether that market opportunity is, or get an idea about where those kind of goods may be valuable to be located in future, if you are looking to grow into Amazon Panny U or Amazon EFN, where you're holding stock in a single member state rather than outside of the EU. The one thing to note, obviously, as I have kind of highlighted in the previous slide, the IOSS is limited to having a intrinsic consignment value of €150. So in practicality, essentially that looks at you can't exceed anything, and it's all goods valued together. So it's not broken down by single kind of products. So for example, if you have 4 products that equate to €200, that is not eligible for, IOSS. But those 3 products that equate to, maybe €120 inclusive of that VAT, then you can, utilize IOSS for that. And it is for goods packed together and dispatched together for the same client. So for example, what I've had discussions with in the past, or what clients may kind of query, is are we able to take a €300 order and then split that order in 2? And the answer to that, unfortunately, is no, because it's done through the same order. So you're not able to kind of split that consignment down the middle. It does have to be per order. But I do know that, there are some workarounds in the checkout where you can kind of, get the client to order more, or just really hold off on placing a cap or making them aware at the point of checkout that anything that goes above that will obviously then face any additional import duties, and because unfortunately you cannot remit the VAT through that IOSS return on those orders above that. With that as well, obviously that is a key note which we should really highlight, is it is done at point of checkout. So you do need to make sure that the VAT is collected at checkout, and it needs to be the local rate of VAT where your consumers are located. So it would be, for example, 19% if your consumer is located in Germany, unless your goods are obviously valued at a discounted rate of VAT, but these are the standard rates. And off the top of my head, I believe France is 22%. So obviously you charge that if it was going to somewhere in France. And I believe 22% as well in the Netherlands, or 23%. So you charge that going to a consumer within the Netherlands. So it's just making sure that that's all set up correctly at the back end of your store. I know Shopify, for example, has really good options that help support with that calculation. The same with, I believe, WooCommerce, or if you have got a custom built website, you could code that in at the back end as well. But that is inclusive of all that plus VAT, and that makes up your consignment value for those imported goods. So I did very, very quickly touch upon, what it would look like for goods that are value exceeding that €150 kind of threshold. So for those goods that, you may have an order that someone does order €500, you can either send it under the delivered at place Incoterm that we briefly mentioned towards the start of today's session, or you can then register for VAT locally where those goods land. So that would be acting as the importer of record, which obviously is a key kind of feature that we've discussed, and also just making sure that the VAT registration is applied for beforehand. That's another kind of key point as well. So if you are looking at a particular market, or you're noticing a trend, you've been selling for a while, you're thinking about using IOSS, you're not really sure, or you're looking at getting a VAT registration because you're seeing an influx on orders, I would kind of note to monitor where you see those orders going above that threshold, because that may be the best point of entry for you to begin with. And then you might be able to say register in France, like boost your sales to France with the orders going above that threshold, whilst also using the IOSS to sell to the remainder of the EU, for those goods that do fall below that 150 euros. So you can do both routes. You can have a local VAT number plus an IOSS, or you can just kind of hold stock and warehouse that locally within the EU also, utilizing the Union one-stop shop registration, which we're not going to go through too much today. But obviously, if you do want to know more about that, please feel free to just reach out to me. My contact details will be at the end of today's session, and we can kind of discuss what you'd be looking at with those areas as well. We also do have some previous kind of webinars where we've touched on the kind of Union one-stop shop. So going on to kind of the last section that we'll be kind of focusing on today before we kind of jump into some questions or look at, how we can support moving forward. It's why is and bringing it back to, topic of today's webinar, why sell cosmetics to the EU? Why sell fashion to the EU? What is the market looking like for me? Is there a good kind of utilization in that market for my brand? So key points here are really, it is a large and also ever growing market. So within the EU, specifically in Germany, France, and Italy, so just 3 of those 27 EU member states, they purchased 44.1 billion worth in cosmetics in 2024. And that figure is expected to grow, 3.28% per year. So it's an ever growing kind of figure. You've really got a good area of utilization for you to warehouse those goods as well. So for example, in Germany, you're seeing that being a key market for purchases of your products, whether that be beauty, fashion, or anything. That may be a good kind of location for you to warehouse those goods, and it may be a good area for you to get those goods into the markets, whether that be through Amazon, whether that be through warehousing for your own website sales. That could be a key area for you to target. And they also have a demand for international brands within the EU as well. Consumers tend to spend a lot on cosmetics from international brands. So, as we've kind of highlighted here, 7 of those top 15 importers of beauty products are EU countries, and Germany alone imported 3.2 billion USD worth of beauty products in 2024, so up 5% on that previous year. So again, it's not just for kind of goods located, it's also where they're looking to shop internationally. So they may be looking at US brands prominent on the market that are quite, a few high fashion brands that are headquartered, that's the word I was looking for, headquartered in the US or headquartered, in the UK, though they may not have a, store within the EU, or they may not be within a country local to them. So just having that accessibility and really able to hit those markets where your goods are going to have a real good chance of, making sales, growing your brand, and also growing brand awareness in those countries. And importantly as well, EU consumers are online. 77% of EU citizens, use the internet to buy something in 2024. So that, could be anything, but just imagine those 77% of, consumers were buying a fashion product or a beauty product. They might be buying a mascara, or they might be buying a t-shirt. We all kind of have those things where we all, well, majority of the time we all do wear, clothes, or want to buy a brand new, t-shirt or jumper or something. And we may not be looking for the style locally to us. So it may be you've seen something on a US store that you want to buy. So just by that US brand having that ability to access that market with IOSS, that then gives you the product that you're looking for, and it also helps growing that brand awareness. We're gonna start looking at some frequently asked questions. So before I kind of jump into these, I am just gonna put out, if you have been kind of listening today, if there's anything I've mentioned that you're not quite sure on, or you have any questions, please do, now is the time to kind of ask them. And I'll be able to kind of go through those with you as well if I can't answer them today. But the first kind of question that we're looking at is, how does the IOSS affect the final price customers see at checkout? What I would note with that is that it shouldn't be really affecting kind of that final price, because as we've previously highlighted, it does need to be charged at the point of checkout. So the VAT should be calculated at your, point of sale, whether that be, the German VAT or the French VAT or anything, wherever your consumer is located. Everything that they see at checkout should be the final price that the customers then pay. And that is what is so great about the IOSS. There is no kind of hidden fees for your customers. There's no kind of, hidden charges. They won't face any, delays, or they shouldn't be facing any delays within that kind of area when the goods land with them. I believe we do just have a question as well. So I'm just going to quickly look at that for us. Oh, sorry, Tanya. I hope my voice was a little bit, I didn't see that at the start there, but I hope you're able to hear me a bit clearer throughout. Okay, so yeah, there is a question here. So if I want to use a 3PL in the EU to distribute a product, do I need to be IOSS registered? So look at that isn't going to be the IOSS that you'd be looking for if it's warehousing within the EU. You'd need a union one-stop shop registration. So that's a slightly different route, but you would need kind of a local VAT number where you're holding that product in the EU, as well as also the union one-stop shop registration. So it won't be kind of required for the IOSS, but for example, if you're going to be selling from both, wherever kind of you're located, if you've got a warehouse in the UK, you may want to utilize the IOSS to sell from there to the EU, whilst you're kind of awaiting your EU VAT number to be approved, just because the time frame is slightly different. And I'll go through the kind of IOSS time frame as well quite shortly. But hopefully that does answer your question there. Looking kind of back at the kind of questions that we've got frequently asked. So there are reporting requirements and deadlines for IOSS. So like, what do those look like? It's monthly with the IOSS return. So the deadline is by the end of the month following, essentially. Typically, we like to ask for the data, just us here at Simply VAT, by the 7th of the month. And then we're able to kind of calculate that return, get that across and approved by the 17th, and then just submitted. Obviously, idealistically, we personally like to kind of get everything done before the end of the month, just to ensure that everything is filed on time. But you do have kind of, a couple of weeks to get everything done, approved, and prepared to pay with the tax offices. Just going to have a quick sip of my coffee. And the next question that we're going to be looking at is, how do returns and refunds work under IOSS? So, for example, if you were to sell something and then get that, refunded, returned, or, the client just wasn't happy, essentially it would just go down as a line item with a, basically cancelled out the transaction on the next return. So let's say they order something from yourselves on the 3rd of February, 4th February, and they returned it the 1st of March, but the IOSS return for February has already been calculated. The owed VAT, you would remit that on kind of the, February return, but on the March return, that would come down as a cancelled item. So it would basically cancel itself out. So it would work in that kind of manner, just because the returns are obviously monthly rather than kind of, a quarterly return that you may be used to, dependent on where you're established. But that would kind of consolidate themselves essentially at the end of each period. So that would be something to note. Another thing to note really there, which we haven't really covered, but it is quite important, is it is up to yourselves kind of what currency you charge in. A recommendation would always be to charge in euros. The reason why that is that essentially the kind of owed VAT needs to be remitted within euros. So if you are charging euros at checkout, it just aids with any kind of discrepancies that may come up when you're looking at exchange rates. Because if you are charging in, GBP or in USD, when you go to pay that return, the exchange rate may have fluctuated as to when that kind of, was initially calculated at point of checkout. So because of that, there may be discrepancies with kind of, a few pennies here, a few pennies there. So it would always be my recommendation to charge at in euros if you can at point of sale, just to ensure that there's no discrepancies when the goods, or when the returns are finally due. The next kind of commonly asked question that we have is what are the most common kind of mistakes beauty and fashion retailers make with IOSS? And that's an interesting question because I don't know whether there's anything such as mistakes. To be completely transparent, is a question we see quite a lot. But with the kind of IOSS, I think it's just not utilizing it. That's the kind of biggest mistake because it's all about trial and error. And as businesses, as we all know, there are risks associated with expansion, with growing your sales, with utilizing a new avenue for access to market. So it's all about trial and error. And it's, having that hesitancy, let's say, to go into the EU, that would be the main mistake because, as you've seen with the facts on the previous slide, there is such a big market for, beauty products, fashion products, anything apparel related within the EU. So it is always worth a try, especially as you have the access to 27 markets through the IOSS return. You can see maybe trends that you weren't seeing before. And because it does enable such a seamless kind of end user experience, then it would kind of be able to access it a bit further as well. So, it has brand awareness and it kind of adds it from there. I think we have another question as well. Oh yeah, Luca, we do help with integration on Shopify. If you are kind of onboarding with us at the moment, we can reach out following the end of our call, or I'll see who's kind of working with you currently and get them to discuss with you further. But yeah, thank you for obviously considering using Simply VAT and for paying attention to today's webinar. But yes, we are able to help with that integration, and someone will reach out to you soon to kind of discuss that further. That kind of leads me on to the last commonly asked question. Again, if you have any more, please do just let me know. But with the IOSS, can it help reduce those risk of custom delays? And the short answer is typically, hopefully, yes. So with customs, having the IOSS, it's all about making sure it's put correctly on the parcel, which is done through your courier, your 3PL, your fulfillment partner. So they will kind of ask for your IOSS number when they are fulfilling your goods, and that will go on the customs paperwork and the parcel to ensure that it's kind of cleared correctly. As long as that is all kind of, noted on the parcel, noted on the consignment, noted on the paperwork, then there should be no delays at customs because there's no kind of VAT for your client to go into, the customs offices and then settle. It's all about making sure that, they've already paid that. It's clear that they paid it because you've got an IOSS number. So those goods are then free to then go to your consumer. So it shouldn't hold up anything there, which we have seen with clients who are utilizing the IOSS scheme currently, that it, has really improved their customer experience, has really improved their reviews. So, it really does help kind of growing a brand awareness as well by just making that one simple change to getting that IOSS registration and then, utilizing those markets ahead of you. So just kind of tying up today's session then, we do have some key resources available for you. So we have an ebook that is ready for the import one-stop shop, and also a guide to go around what the EU cosmetic regulations look like within the EU, just because, especially with fashion brands, beauty brands, there may be some like ingredients that you need to make sure are translated, or you may need certain certification depending on what, is inside your products. So it's always good to kind of look at those aspects as well. So that would be a really key kind of resource, especially for those beauty brands looking to grow into those new markets. And excitingly, we have a deal going on. So we are running a Black Friday deal here at Simply VAT. If you are looking to kind of use IOSS or do anything, you will be getting 20% off. So feel free to just reach out and have a discussion with us, and we can get you set up and ready for that moving forward. And Finally, thank you so much for listening to me go on today about kind of, the IELTS and how it can help. This will be our last kind of session of the year with the webinars. So thank you if you have attended any more of our sessions that we've hosted this year. And hopefully we look forward to welcoming you back in the new year. But have a lovely remainder of your year and thank you again for joining today.